these things. It's all going perfectly, and then you can't see a thing. Can you hear me?
We can.
If you can hear me, I will just speak even though I can't see a single thing. So welcome to our event today. This is the fourth in a series of events that the City and Guilds Foundation are putting on, looking at the role of training and skills development and how it can help us all create more diverse and inclusive organisations. Today, as a way of celebrating Pride Month, we're focusing on what being LGBTQ+ feels like in the workplace and what type of training employers need to think about to ensure the retention and progression of our LGBTQ+ colleagues. I'm delighted to be joined by a first-class panel who I'll introduce you to just in 1 minute. But just to let you know that there will be time for some questions at the end, so do put them in the Q&A and we'll get through as many as we can. We're really hoping that people will take some action after coming to some of these events. So we're going to be talking to you about maybe taking a pledge of doing something small, big, whatever, just taking some action after this. And I'll come back at the end and tell you how to go about doing that. I think that's probably my bits tied up. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce my guest speakers today. First of all, we have Dr. Anne Lim, who is the Vice Chair and Chair-elect of City and Guilds, and Anne's going to lead our discussion today. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
We also have Tanya Compas, who is the CEO and founder of Exist Loudly. Welcome, Tanya. We have Jay Sloan, who's the Organisational Development Lead at GSK. Welcome, Jay. And finally, we've got our very own Kirstie Donnelly, CEO of City and Guilds. So welcome, Kirstie. Lovely to see you all today. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Anne, and when you see me pop up, that will be when it's time for the questions. So for now, over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Sally, and many thanks to City and Guilds and you and the team for organising this series of events that you've just explained. We are number 4 in, very appropriately, in Pride Month, focusing today, as you have said, on the workplace and how we bring ourselves to the workplace, really. So my role in this is just to help chair and move things along. I will perhaps interject with the odd bit of my story or something relevant if that comes about. But actually, you've got 3 terrific people here, and we want to hear just a little bit about your stories to get things going, if you don't mind. And there's no a special order in which this couple of minutes goes, but maybe if we start with you, Jay, because you and I have had a chance to have a chat. If you could just tell us all a little bit about how you experience being somebody from the LGBTQ+ community in your workplace.
Yeah, sure. So just to mention, we like a little bit of labels, I think, in the LGBTQ+ space. So identifies primarily queer is the word I like to use, but also gay and non-binary. So my pronouns are they, them. I think, and I'm very, very out at work. In fact, one of my friends used to describe me as the biggest gay at GSK. And that's intentional, because I think at some point we need to make a decision to be visible and be seen. And so that's what I've chosen to do. In addition to my day job, I would say over the past 20 years doing various things, as you mentioned, ended up in organizational development. And I think I've also been a leader in our employee resource group, and I would say on some level an advisor to senior leaders who are curious and interested and motivated, to create a more inclusive space for LGBTQ+ people. And I think also have an interest in looking at the life sciences and healthcare industry as a whole. And so I helped co-found and I currently co-chair something called the Proud Science Alliance. And you can look it up online, Google it, and learn a little bit more. But that's kind of how I exist, I would say, at work.
Terrific. That's a great introduction and leads very nicely into Tanya. Do you mind going next and telling us about Exist Loudly and yourself?
Of course. So yeah, I guess my kind of career-wise is, as a queer person, it's been, again, very, very different, I feel like. For me, I came into the like charity kind of sector straight out of university. And I was still straight then, you know what I mean? I was still straight. I still thought, you know, I'm heterosexual, And then I started working at a social justice organisation where you go into schools and you're talking around like all these various different issues. And then obviously as staff, we used to do these things called lunch and learns where you could talk about anything you wanted, whatever your favourite thing is. And there was a person called Frankie who started working there. At first, oh my God, Frankie's so weird, And Frankie, you know, was very, very visibly queer. And would talk around like queerness and just LGBTQ plus identities, gender expression and things in language in ways that was really accessible and in ways that I've never heard said to me in a way that was like, you know, that kind of piqued my interest. And then, you know, we went as a colleagues to go and support Frankie at Pride, because Frankie was like, oh, you know, a lot of their friends were busy and stuff. And we're like, oh, we'll go to support Frankie because Frankie was the only like openly like queer person at work. And then went there, and then I was like, I think I'm gay, and that was really about it. You know, and then from that point, it was kind of, you know, you go through and you're talking with kids, and you're explaining things surrounding being LGBTQ plus and what that looks like, especially as a Black person, especially someone, you know, from London, all these various different aspects of identity. And I feel like from that point of my understanding, whereby I've been working with young people just want to meet you as who you are. They don't want you to be this person who you think is the coolest or whatever. They just want to see you as who they are. And like, even from that point, you know, I've worked in sports for development charities. I've worked at LGBTQ plus homeless charities and things. And it's like, it's been really interesting navigating the world as somebody, again, who is LGBTQ plus and also someone who is Black, because you have, like, in the charity sector, it is normally very heterosexual and very white. And it's so even, you know, it can be an LGBTQ plus organisation that says, hey, the Black issues, talking about that is too much. You can be at one that is a very diverse in terms of race-wise organisation that says, hey, why do you have to make everything so gay? And it's just like, well, I can't win. And that's how, obviously, now I've ended up with Exist Loudly, which is my own organisation, which is to support Black LGBTQ plus young people. And it's great. I think, obviously, now I can set what my work remit is and things. And we can be as unapologetically gay and Black and whatever without anyone telling us to kind of tone it down because it might offend their funders or offend staff member or whatever it may be. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey to say the least, but again, I would never expect when I first started the charity sector, I'd end up with my own supporting LGBTQ plus people, considering for 23 years, I thought I was straight. So yeah, it's been a different journey to say the least.
Terrific, Tanya. That's given us again so many insights, really, which we can just follow up in the discussions. Every story is just unique and fantastic, isn't it? And there's so much to learn from that. So, Kirstie, what do you want to tell us?
Yeah, no, it's interesting just listening then to Tanya and even Jay. You know, Jay, when he talked about labels, I'll come back to that. And Tanya, when she said, when do you know? Actually, it's really funny. It was made me reflect. When do you know about your sexuality, who you are? And it's really, it took me back really to, I think I started to have suspicions about myself when I was in the playground and we used to play the old fashioned game. I don't think it happens anymore. Kiss catch, and used to kiss catch somebody, go around the back of the bike sheds. We're very advanced. We're very progressive school, you know. This was at infants. And I was always a bit perturbed that I wanted to chase all the girls and kiss them and not the boys. But no, joke, I mean, or maybe sometimes both even. And there's a serious point in that. And I suppose I look back now and I think, gosh, wasn't I lucky? I never felt I ever got bullied for that. Actually, if anything, at the time, I had two very big buck teeth. I've still got two big teeth, but they're no longer buck, thanks to my parents getting me braces. But the point was, I got teased more for that than I did for the fact that I clearly didn't realise at that point that I was going to ultimately be labelled one day with some terminology, whether it was gay, lesbian, whatever terminology is used. And I suppose that brings me back to Dave's point about labels. It's funny how labelling has become more important, more of late, really, because it's about feeling like you can belong. You know, it's a tribal thing, isn't it? We all feel that we want to belong, but I suppose I've never felt I needed to in any way label myself. And I remember when I first told my mum, when I really did truly, as you might say, come out, in the sense that I took my mum to a pub. I came back from university and said, look, Mum, I've got something to tell you. I don't think I'm probably ever going to get married and give you grandchildren. I think this is going to be my, path of life. Not that I hadn't also had boyfriends too. And I remember she cried and I was like, oh my God, that's not the reaction. My mum was a very soft, loving, open-hearted woman. I was shocked that her response was to cry. And when she stopped crying, she said, I'm not crying because I'm unhappy about your choice. I'm frightened for you as to, have you just made life a lot harder. Now, this, remember, is what, I don't know, 30, I'm 54 today, so it's 30 something years ago. So I can now see why she might have thought that then. So I'm just delighted we're able to have this conversation today in a way that, whilst there are still challenges and barriers, as we're going to hear and discuss, it is so much different now, I think, than it was generationally for me, and probably for you as well, Anne. I think that there is a generational aspect to this, and I think within that generational aspect, there's a, how do you identify yourself? So I've always felt really lucky that I've just always been me. I've never ever hidden my sexuality or choices. I've just always felt it's about the people you love or the people you fall in love with. And if that happens to be a woman, it's a woman. If it happens to be a man, it's a man. Or it happens to be someone transgender, it's someone's transgender. So I've never defined myself by that identity, but I do understand why labels have become a little bit more significant. So yeah, just a little bit of an insight from me.
Terrific. I'll just, I'm meant to be sort of chairing this, but I think I'm allowed my 2 minutes as well. But actually it very much builds on what Kirstie said, because of course I'm the grandmother in the picture here. I'm 68, so generationally, as far as Tanya and Jay, and probably a number of you, I hope a number of you much younger listening and watching today. The experience I had is not dissimilar to Kirstie's, really. It was, you've got to go back to what it was like in the 80s, which of course some of you don't know, but if you have seen It's a Sin, which is terrific, it really, reminds you of it. So life was very different, and actually just being a woman, never mind defining yourself in any way, was quite a struggle. So I won't just go over that background, but actually what made a difference to me as an older person were two things. One was getting involved with young people in scouting, where actually, just as Kirstie has said, so it's a charity world, Tanya, it's a big UK organisation, worldwide organisation, but what really matters is who you are and how you come to scouting. Gender fluidity was something, a term that they taught me, and being who they are and valuing the other and respecting the differences. It's so encouraging when you see younger people actually telling older people to do that. So, that's really great. And then the second, and I'll end with this, was the opportunity that a guy called Neil Bentley Gochman gave to me ages ago, when we were both in the closet and actually working in Learn Direct with Kirstie. And I know Jeff Greenwich is on this call as well. Neil was at the CBI, and he's gay, but he wasn't open about it. In fact, he said recently only when he got the OBE did he have to be open about it. So, there we go. But Neil said a couple of years ago, the FE sector, further education, skills training, the world of City and Guilds actually, and the world I know and I'm passionate about, has tons of young people, and we're not doing enough as a sector to support LGBTQ+. We're not, as employers, the topic of today, doing enough. And he arranged a little event and he asked me to come along, and I did speak about that. And actually, in a sense, that was the first time I was really open about it. And since then, I've never stopped, really, in one sense. So I will stop now. Yeah, there's something very liberating, I have to say, about living in the 2020s. And I hope, turning to our topic here, we can have a look at the way in which employers and individuals in the workplace can support inclusion and diversity, but particularly with regard to LGBTQ+ individuals and colleagues and employers. So anybody want to just start off? I mean, Jay, coming back to you, you've mentioned a little bit about what GSK does. Do you want to explore a bit of that in a bit more detail? Give us some ideas.
Yeah, the way I would talk about this in terms of providing some sort of education or training targeting LGBTQ+ people is that I think it's still somewhat old school. And the reason why I say it in those terms is because in my own mind, I'm quite progressive. And so what I think what exists currently is kind of remedial training, as I would call it, or preventative, because we talk about unconscious bias training or leadership training that's inclusive. So there's modules that really bring in examples of LGBTQ plus situations, that kind of thing. And so, but the what is the purpose behind that? It's really to say, don't discriminate, or don't be this person who does these things. And so in that sense, there's benefit, because I can show up at a place like GSK, and I walk down the hallways or whatever, and people don't call me names, or there's no active discrimination. I think what we need to start talking about, and what is on my mind, is that as a queer person showing up at work, there's nothing targeting me. In fact, I've been in part of conversations really for years, about can we implement something, that's, and the reason for that is because if you look at it really closely, there are leadership programs, for example, targeting women. Because of the events of the last couple of years, really raising race and ethnicity to the front, there is programming, designed to support not just getting people of difference into the door, but in this case, supporting women and people from different races and ethnicities outside the minority into leadership roles and supporting them to grow. I don't see that happening. It's rare. In fact, in the past few years, there's been one company that I've interacted with, that does that actively. So I think what I would like to see is that switch away from make sure you don't do these things to once queer people show up, then we're so glad you're here and let us support you, because I think there's a good reason for that, because there's discrepancies in leadership positions, the same as you see in women or and ethnic minorities as well, and senior positions, so there's something going on, about that. That's how I would introduce it. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good introduction. So, I mean, Kirstie, what are we doing in City and Guilds to address that? What are your thoughts on what we're doing now and what we could do more of, really?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think, look, it's a slightly overused cliche to say, but we're on a journey. I think, like lots of organisations, I think we've had a rude awakening, haven't we, as a culture, as a society, and City and Guilds is no less or no more. I like to think in some respects we've been doing more for longer, but that isn't to say to address a whole range of issues that are encompassed by diversity and inclusion, of which this is part of that agenda. And I was struck by a conversation I was in with Deborah Francis White, who is the raconteur and comedian, social commentator. She did an event with me in an apprentice conference quite recently, where she talked to the acronym now of DIB, DIB, diversity, inclusion and belonging. But it really struck me because I think that belonging, I think that's what Jay's talking about. I mean, we can train, we must try and address through awareness raising, which is what we're trying to do. And to answer your question directly, holding events like this, not just so that all colleagues across City and Guilds can attend, as indeed lots of them have been, but so that we can shine a light externally as well. But it goes beyond that. It goes to the heart of how do you create a culture and a community that's about creating a sense of belonging. And I suppose you do that through your behaviours, top down, bottom up. And I'm hoping that, to a certain extent, that's why. I mean, I often joke these days that the title of chief executive officer is more like chief emotional officer or chief engagement officer, because a lot of the job that you have to do as leaders and need to be doing as leaders is creating that environment for belonging, so that everybody can come and feel they belong. And so I suppose that's where we're really shining a light, Anne, is yes, of course, we've got our diversity and inclusion targets, and those targets include where we recruit from, so that we create greater diversity. We make it, so as Jay just said, a welcoming place for people who are whatever they want to label themselves as. When they arrive, they don't feel like they're slightly out of place in some shape or form. But it just takes time, I think. These things take time to bed in. A single training course isn't going to address it. But it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be doing things that actually help raise that awareness. It's really about that deep-rooted behavioural change and cultural shift that I think we're starting on at City and Guilds, and already gone quite a long way down, but there's more for us to do.
Tanya, culture change and behavioural change. Somebody's put something in the Q&A about, is lack of discrimination sufficient for inclusivity, which is part of what we're talking about now. So in the charity sector, or in any of your worlds really, have you any thoughts on how you really help get genuine behavioural, cultural change that leads to that sense of belonging.
Of course, I think essentially, I think a lot of like businesses, corporates, non-profits go wrong is that you look at doing the external first. So they will externally maybe change their marketing and comms, whether it's to have Black POC openly, like visibly queer faces on their marketing comms, whether it's to do use illustrations and all these things to be like, hey, look, we are looking at this, but actually internally, what does that look like? And I think that requires having like an audit actually around your staff, and actually giving staff an opportunity of having external auditors to actually look over how safe do they feel within the workplace, and not safe in terms of like how physically safe you feel, but actually mentally, emotionally, and how much of their authentic selves can they bring into the workplace, and how much do they have to leave at home. And I think that kind of distinguishing around that, but I think that as Chris was saying earlier, it's so easy to get kind of like focusing on the labels and being like, now we're going to focus on LGBTQ plus, and now we're going to focus on Black, and now we're going to focus on women. And it's like, I know, for example, when International Women's Month comes up, Pride Month, Black History Month, I am busy and booked the whole 3 months, because that's suddenly now the time when people want to hear what we have to say. But like, we exist in these things all year round, and I think you're doing a disservice to the company, to the person, to individuals, by virtue of looking at everyone by virtue of their labels versus by them on a human, like, individual level.
Yeah.
Because it's like and I think it's like you need to be able to invest in, for example, in hiring external facilitators to come and facilitate training and talks with your senior management team. I think it has to start with senior management first. Like there's been so many times where I've been in past jobs and stuff like that where I went to one potential funder, and I was made to bring my young people down there, and my young people were predominantly Black and brown from Brixton, and we went there. And the day of training was led by like by someone from the CSR team or something. But all the young people saw the whole day was just fields of faces of white people, white upper class, middle class people. And of these people saying, back in my day, I was 16 and I left school and I made it. Now you can do it too. And it was just like, God, like it's so tone deaf. And it got even worse when one of the young people actually asked, why is there no, why you've shown us all the pictures, your slides of your senior management team, why is there no one that's Black and brown in it? And when the women from HR was in it, they gave a very professional PC answer. And then after, the young person asked again, because we got fobbed off. And then the young person asked again, this is when the woman wasn't there, and the woman from the senior management was like, oh, it's because it's harder to hire diverse people at a senior management level because it requires more qualifications. But if you look at our stores, we're really, really diverse. And what you're telling, and this is meant to be an empowering day for these young people. This is a massive, massive brand. And I'm like, and I then sent a message to my colleague who set up this whole thing in the first place. And I said, hey, this was the guy, I had to debrief the young people afterwards because they were really impacted. They said, oh, wait, so you're telling me I can only aspire to work in your store, but I can't aspire to your, to work in the senior management team. And I said that to my colleague, a white guy, and he basically said, oh, but they didn't mean it like that, did they? And I'm like, well, you weren't there. And you're telling me now, as somebody who's had to deal with now a group of 13 young people aged 16 to 18, all these girls who, wanted to work in these businesses, who are now being told you're only as good to sell the clothes. And it's just like, it wasn't, and that then goes back on both, when you're looking at a charity level, it's like looking at the funders that you go with, and who's leading your business development, who's leading the partnerships, because are they then telling people, are they actually really letting people know what the young people are like coming into the room? Are they saying, hey, make sure that young people want to, they don't care about what your role is, they just care about being around people that they see them. There was one woman, the only person that said anything of worth during that whole day was a young girl, she was a white girl from London, whatever. She was like, on paper, there's nothing at all that's similar about her compared to young people. But she came in and said, listen, I'm here doing an unpaid internship. I work at Marks and Spencer on the weekends to pay for thingy. It was just real. She was just herself. She wasn't trying to fob off and create this like, oh, because I was so hard for me. She said, no, I've chosen to work this because I really want to get in the business. And that's the only way that I can, is by doing an unpaid internship. And the young people literally lapped up everything she said. She was wonderful. And it's like, I think there's such it becomes very clear, even in how businesses engage within their CSR work, actually what the real sentiments are around diversity and inclusion. Because again, you look at the foundations and you see all the business. There was one that I tried to reach out for last year, Exist Loudly, and there was I was like, oh, do you want to donate some jackets or whatever to Winter Coat Drive we're doing? And then I got, very again, a long email just fobbing off saying, oh, we do all of these things, and they, provide the impact report. And I think sometimes people don't understand that I actually read these things. So I go through it, and I was like, I'm really, you know, I got ADHD, so for me, I can really like, I get interested in things, and I'm like, I must like learn everything about it. And I was like, so I went through it. You know, you see the trustee board, and everyone was white, majority all male, and you work through the things that the organisation are working with, none of which are black led, none of which are LGBTQ plus. And I pointed out, I was like, oh hey, like, you know, it's great to see the work you're doing. I've noticed you're not working with anyone LGBTQ plus or any black led organisations. If at one point in the future you'd like to explore this, I would love to open up the conversation with you. And then I got an email sent back saying, oh, but we're working with the Stephen Lawrence Foundation. And I was like, okay, well, that's one, you know, and then it came back on very, very defensive responses. And it was because they are not used to being called out, they're used to being celebrated because they're doing something good. But it's like, you can always do more. And I think when people, again, labels and stuff, and it's a tick box, we have to work with one black, let's work with trans organisation, let's work with an LGBTQ plus organisations, but you can have a black trans LGBTQ plus person working in one organisation that has nothing to do with gender identity or anything. It could be like environment stuff, you know, and it's just like, but again, it's so focused on labels that it means that you rob yourself of actually genuinely creating the connections needed to create the impact that people are striving for, internally in the business and externally with your CSR work. But there's so much work that needs to be done, and it all starts with having genuine conversations like we're having today.
Yeah, no, can I just come in,
Kirstie, yeah.
And I'm sure, you know, you and Jay will want to as well, Anne, but look, I think that's absolutely right, Tanya, and I think that's why I was saying right at the beginning about this belonging. It is about this, it's mind shift, it's belonging, it's culture, it's all of that. I can see there's a really good question that we'll come to later from Rebecca about what is it something you are doing that when you're really demonstrating, you know, and the problem with this, of course, is it's almost the intangible is when you'll really know it's truly embedded. And Anne, you asked me the question earlier, you know, what is City and Guilds doing? One of the things I should have said at the time, but something Tanya just reminded me of, was we did a piece of work last year around a program called The Lived Experience. And it was fascinating. And, you know, I'm not in any way trying to promote out there for everybody else, but Carers, led by Frank, who's Frank Douglas, who's one of our, happens to also be one of our great trustees and a great advocate of diversity inclusion, and in all shapes and forms, but certainly around obviously people of colour and ethnic minority. He really encouraged me as a CEO to think long and hard about what is the true lived experience of this organisation. And I was genuinely really quite shocked what we found out. Don't be wrong, there was really loads of positives in there, but when you look really deeply through the lens of somebody who, you know, attaches themselves to a label of LGBTQ plus, or someone who's from an ethnic minority, or someone who's disabled, has a disability of some kind, whatever the segmentation, which is how we did the groups originally, came out, every one of the common denominator through everyone was to create a lived experience. You've got to create that psychological safety. You've got to create that safe environment where people really feel they can belong. And I suppose, so going back really to the chat in a way, some of the questions in the chat, that's what I think organisations have to really do. They have to really, as you say, Tanya, not just have a tick box. You have to set targets, of course you do, because if you don't have anything to measure, you'll never know. But you have to really be able to also measure those intangibles as well, and really look at all dimensions, not just say, great, we've now got a strategy for this, a strategy for that, we've ticked that box. It's got to be really deep and meaningful. And I think these things take years to really, really properly embed.
I just want to add in as well, because I really, when you were talking, it made me, like the last one, like one of the charities I used to work at actually was I delivered a program funded by City and Guilds, and it was, you know, and it was the first time I ever managed my own program, and I was, you know, it's called Generation Storm, and we've done it for 2 years, and that whole my exercise now is actually based entirely upon Generation Storm, that was funded by City and Guilds. And I say that because, you know, first of all, having Marcia, I don't know if Marcia still works at City and Guilds or not, but Marcia was heading up.
He's online now.
Oh, I love Marcia. Anyway, Marcia, I don't think Marcia understands that, like, having a black woman, for example, lead. This is the first time I was going into, you know, moving into the senior team within this organisation, and I was really nervous because, you know, normally I dress more masculine, I wear tracksuits, and and I went in, and I felt like every time I always felt like I had to shift who I was to be able to be seen in that space. And Marcia was delivering. We had like I think it was like a day, one day, maybe 2 days, I can't remember. It was like, had all these other organisations that City and Guilds are funding, majority of whom were all people from, like, it was probably one of the best, like, everyone was able to build a genuine connection between all these organisations. You have people from Ireland, from Jordan, people that didn't, you know, again, vast variety of people that just, and it was incredible to learn about these organisations from a very authentic place, because you're not talking around it. I didn't feel like I had to perform and be something else. Like, you know, everyone else had all their formal presentations, and I just went and sat at the table and just spoke, and everyone listened, and I felt valued, I felt respected, and the virtue is everyone in that space sees value in supporting communities, and that was a one like kind of common thread between everyone. And again, having Marcia as being the person that I was mainly, liaising with and stuff like that, was, it was incredible for me. Having a Black woman leader, and for me leading a program that was not specifically Black, but by virtue of myself and my colleague who led it, both being Black women, our majority of the young people there were all Black. And City and Guilds engaged with it. We had Polly as well, who also engaged with, like, really engaged with the work. They came to, I done an International Women's Day event that I was fundraising for, and City and Guilds, done a cake sale to fundraise to help put money towards it, and it was just like such a small thing, because you already funded the whole program, but you're doing a cake sale to put extra money in. And it's like, because of that connection that I had with the team, again with the funders, which I've never had with any other funders, I never was expected to ask. I was never asked any questions by City and Guilds and for impact reporting in terms of like, oh, what trauma have the young people gone through, and what is that which I've had happen at other ones which have been really problematic. There was nothing genuinely, there was nothing exploitative, and that's why it's like. And I say this not to be like, oh, because I'm on a call of City and Guilds, but genuinely, I've always spoken so highly around how the funding relationship I had with City and Guilds was, because I felt like I was seen as my full self, and therefore I could bring, and therefore you lot could see the richness of the program. And I wanted to invite you into the richness of the program, because I wanted you to see that the impact that you were making by virtue of just seeing me and seeing the young people as just young people, not by virtue of being, oh, we're helping some Black kids. Like, no, we're helping young people. And that is honestly what I haven't seen across other funders ever since that point.
Look, Tanya, that's so good to hear. But I want to just look, so thank you for that. And it's great to hear the energy and the impact. I just want to move us in, and it might be that Jay has something to say about this, into, it picks up the question, I think it was from Rebecca, that Kirstie sort of responded to, about what is the biggest one thing that can happen that would make a difference. But can you look at that panel in relation to the role of leadership, particularly because we are lucky in City and Guilds that we have a leader in Kirstie, and who is giving some of the examples of this. Lots of other charities, workplaces, there's a task to be done with leadership to help them get into the right frame of mind, really, and to do all the things that you've all been talking about. So just start with you, Jay, on that. Do you say something about that from a GSK point of view, from your own point of view?
Yeah, and just to build a bridge between what was being talked about before and where we're going now, is that it's my personal opinion, is if you're listening to the chat before and it resonates, that like, oh, my organization ticks boxes, or we're heading in that direction, that's the bare minimum. And if you're not even there yet, you're way behind the curve. And I think with any organization, if you're thinking about what do we need to do, I agree. You need to have targets, otherwise how can you report? How can you really understand? But that's kind of basic, So I think where I can talk about the experience I have at GSK, and we are beyond. The organization is beyond. The way that I talk is beyond, because I'm like, that is like, so 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's like, if you're not doing the stuff that Tanya's talking about, get with it, And I think the other thing is that if you're at the place now where you're trying to do something different, and it's a hard question, what is the one thing? I mean, I think certainly, I think what makes the biggest difference is what somebody already mentioned. It's about leadership, because if you have senior leaders that aren't just talking the talk, that they're out there, they're showing up, they're talking about it and saying the words like, or the acronyms like LGBTQ, and being very specific. They show up when they're being asked to show up, and they resource it. And that doesn't mean all the time money. They're giving their time, they're showing up and saying what's going on. But also I think what they're doing is supporting was what we're talking about here, moving beyond of kind of catering to the straight white man and saying, ooh, let's take care of you, because you don't quite get it yet. So we're just going to give you some training so you don't discriminate. That's yesterday. What I think the biggest difference is, where are the programs? I'll give you one example. So at GSK, we have a women's leadership program. It's coaching, essentially. I coach on that program, have done for 4 years, and it's a multifaceted program. And I work with exceptional women, and it's an exceptional program. And in my personal experience, it also means advancement of these women, you know, and that's exactly what it's designed to do. I was like, what? And they just in the past year have extended that out to ethnic minorities. Fantastic. But I don't see any of that happening. In fact, I was like, can we at least just have coaching designed to be accepting of LGBTQ plus people? And they're like, we went through it and ultimately it was shut down, you know? So I think what the message to me is that we want to be inclusive, but we're not going to, you know, we're not going to put in place, you know, the programs that we have for other communities, the difference, you know. So what is the one thing you can do is, I think, move beyond, you know, it's like beyond, because the thing is really hard to define it. Look internal to your organization and then make decisions about how can you not just kind of talk about it, but do some stuff. Don't be on the sidelines, be in the arena, you know, with me, you know. That's why I would describe it.
I mean,
Terrific. Yeah, Kirstie. Yeah.
Say, look, I think I love that phrase. So we'll definitely be borrowing that. Thank you, Jay. That's always a great thing about these conversations and move beyond, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you're right. Anyone who's just ticking boxes and saying, well, we'll achieve these targets is, as you say, so yesterday. Yes, you do still need to set. You have to, because you have to keep pushing to the next. But that's not what this is about. It's got to be about, as you say, moving beyond and continually taking the whole organisation, in the case of an employer like ours, with you. And I mean, one of the things that I'm really proud about, that we're just at the start of, but I do think it's a demonstration of that moving beyond, is almost bottom up, but I think it has hopefully come as a result of leadership too, through things like the lived experience program that I talked about a moment ago. Is we've now got community groups that are led by colleagues across the organisation. So we've got LGBTQ plus, we've got a faith group, we've got a women's group, we've got a racial equality group. So we've got these groups that are being literally led, which is just so brilliant, by the people inside the organisation. They're not governed in that sense. They're not a leadership led. I do go to some, other colleagues from the exec go to them. We come along when we can add some value. But the great thing about that is it's a movement that's happening. And I'd like to think that's an example, going back to, again, Rebecca's great question. That's when you know you're at the cusp of a turning point. Doesn't mean to say it's turned, doesn't mean to say that it's all embedded in the way you want, but you know that you are starting to move beyond. So I think it's organizations needing to look at those sorts of approaches. And when you get that ripple effect and that bottom up grassroots movement happening, is when I think you can start to hope that you are getting to the kind of moving beyond places that you talked about. And of course, we shouldn't ignore. I don't want to turn this into a return on investment conversation, but you know, all of the data, all the reports more than suggest there is a return on investment for an organization. Whether you're a charity, whether you're a PLC, whatever you're doing, the more you invest in your diversity, inclusion and belonging, the more you will see a greater return, both in attrition, both in who you attract, both in productivity. So there's like, you know, you almost feel like shaking leaders sometimes say, come on, you know, all the reasons, other than just being humane and good and decent society-wise, there are actual economic productivity reasons for why we need to be investing here. So yeah, that's all I'd add.
Can I add just one thing?
Yeah, Jay, come in. Yeah.
Just because I think it's an important point. Why go beyond? And I think in my mind, and it's clear in the literature and everything, if you just investigate just a little bit, the system is set up primarily, you know, with a straight white cisgendered male. That's the leadership archetype that's accepted. You know, so if you go beyond, what does that mean exactly? It's saying I can show up as a queer person as I am, lead how I am meant to lead, you know, do the work that I need to do. And that when it doesn't match the system, you know, that's not set up for me, that's the problem. You know, so moving beyond is like dismantling the system a bit. And a lot of people talk about that. I'm not talking about toppling, you know, the global system. It's saying make room for me.
Yeah,
Make
exactly.
room for Tanya.
Yeah,
add on to that just quickly as well. I think it's like not even just moving beyond, but I think it's also welcoming the uncomfortable. Like I think so many organizations they kind of stay within the comfort zone, you know. So and it's like, but you have to listen to the very uncomfortable realities that your staff members have, especially those who, again, you know, everyone lives intersectional lives, but especially those who are Black, PSE, Muslim, disabled, neurodivergent, queer, LGBT+, trans, etc. What are their realities of being within your organization? and actually looking into, is one thing bringing, you know, starting about all of these courses, oh yeah, we're going to bring in more Black or POC or more LGBT plus staff members, but are you going to retain them? And again, I think the longest time I've worked ever at any place has been 2 years. And it got to the point I had to leave because I suggested starting an LGBTQ plus program, and they said, well, why can't they just join all the other programs that we do? And it's like, well, great, but equally, why do you therefore see why you should have gang programs? Why should you see you have young programs, people who are disabled, people in care, etc.? Why are you able to see why these young people require and deserve their own programming? But when it comes to LGBTQ plus, you say, oh, but why can't they come to everything else? And the reason why is because it made them uncomfortable. And then, but then they, you know, fast forward a few months' time, and then there was funding available specifically for LGBTQ plus programming, and they said, hey, Tanya, you want to start a program around trans young people? And I said, why? I said, I'm not trans, so why? Who's going to deliver it? Because none of you have any understanding around LGBTQ plus identities. And I vetoed it. I said, if you start it, I will leave. And they didn't, because I'm not. But this is the thing. I think the issue is where they just can't retain staff because, again, you only see it as like their value within certain elements. And it's like, I think there's just so much more that needs to be done. And it does start with investing into your staff members, investing into their training, investing into their interests, like lunch and learns that I used to do at my old job. Again, that's how I understood that I was queer. Like, if I hadn't had that lunch and learn, or hadn't worked there at that point, I unfortunately would have probably still been heterosexual, and that would have been sad for everybody. So it just, I think there's so much that needs to be done, and so much more. And I think it does always start with being uncomfortable. It's through the uncomfortability that the real change happens. But that means, again, looking beyond having a diverse, you know, we're going to make it move from having like all cishet, you know, white men, and let's make it diverse because now we've got women involved. But it's all, you know, predominantly working upper class white women who have been university educated. Where does that fit for everyone else, you know? And I think that it requires, when you stand up for something, it requires going the full way and putting the whole weight behind it. So again, if there's organizations and companies and brands that are pro-trans, for example, you know that the moment you say that you're pro-trans, that TERFs and like trans exclusionary feminists, they will come and rally up in their hundreds and thousands or whatever, and they will bully companies into silence. And it happens time and time again, and it takes the point where an organization or brand has to be like, no, I support trans people, so we're going to step ahead with it, and we're going to do so. If you don't like us anymore, then so be it. But and it's when it comes to push comes to shove in elements like that you really see where the business or brand stands. And whilst on a global scale, you know, maybe like, okay, it's safer for our organization to be a bit quiet and not maybe talk about trans issues. However, that may mean that maybe the one trans staff member now that you've got within your organization actually now feels unsafe on the basis that they feel like you don't stand up for them. And that is where the internal versus the external really you have to kind of align them both, because everyone can be impacted, and the internal staff members need to feel safe and need to feel like you genuinely believe what you're saying before you start preaching out to the wider world around where you stand when it doesn't align with what you actually do internally. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it is possible to make that change, but it does start with the uncomfortable.
Well, it's such a great phrase, isn't it? Welcoming the uncomfortable. Of course, most people spend most of their time trying not to face up to the uncomfortable. Yeah. And in organisations and employers, we put up defences that are the absolute antithesis of all the behaviour and the experience that you've been sharing with us. And there's a need for those leaders to be courageous to enable that to happen, as you're illustrating. Just on a practicality, I want to say that the session, just to remind people, is being recorded and it is available, because there are people watching this who are doing stuff in their own organisations and saying, could I show this to my governing body, for example? Well, yes. Actually, they probably do need to welcome the uncomfortable in that case. And if the experiences that we're talking about here can be helpful to move that along, please use this as a resource. I'm sure we can kind of sort all of that out for you. Equally, the questions that have been coming in, we can't answer all of them. You know how it is multitasking on these webinars. We can pick up some things, but not all of them. But as Sally will say, when we just come to the close, we'll capture them all and we will make sure that there are answers given in as far as we can. To our panelists, and I want to make the point about the business case. That's all. That just, it was really good that Kirstie just said that, because for some people that will be the way in, and then you have to go beyond, because if you haven't got that, they wouldn't be brought in the first place. And actually impact reports and business cases are actually valid anyway, as are getting the awards for being an LGBTQ plus friendly organisation or whatever. And the Stonewall Awards were referenced in one of the questions as well, and Stonewall materials. I don't have any personal experience of those, but if anybody wants to sort of pick that up, I'm sure we can have a look at it. Certainly the celebration of organisations and what employers do is another way that makes people who might be a bit afraid of tackling this stuff because they just don't know how, it makes them feel good about it. So I think those are all very helpful and valid things. Sally, you've come in on cue, which is exactly what I was told to do at 1:45. Are you going to, do you want to pick up on any specific questions?
I'm just going to pose some of the questions that have come up in the Q&A. I know there's been quite a few in the chat as well, and we'll just get through as many as we can. So there was one that someone early on said, love to hear Jay talk about leaders who are curious. Would love to hear more about how this curiosity helps to build an inclusive culture. Could you maybe talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I'll give you a very practical example. So a guy called Brian, who's the CEO of our consumer business, was appointed as the chair of our global LGBTQ plus council at GSK. And I was like, really? That guy? You know, he's like a straight white boy, like a frat boy. That's how I perceived him. But I had the chance to meet him in chat and stuff. And basically what he said is, I need your help, because he recognized, you know, that this is not his area of expertise. And, you know, I know a lot about being me, you know, so I think what he said is, can we just have a chat? And basically over the course of a year, you know, he said every 4 to 6 weeks we met, and he could ask anything, you know, and I would talk about it. He was genuinely curious because he wanted to expand his understanding, his empathy, you know, because in his role, not just as the chair of the council, but also in his role as a leader, you know, and I think it transformed the way that he led. And I think I've seen that replicated over and over again. The opposite then is, as we've also heard, that has nothing to do with me, which we know is not true.
It's funny, actually, Jay, just on that, I mean, and just on that point about being curious, I mean, if I think back, as I say, to the work we've done as a leadership team with the exec, there is no doubt, and I don't know whether any of my exec colleagues are on this listening, they might be, but we had some really quite uncomfortable moments through this past year, especially as we went through the lived experience where, and I'm sorry to sort of stereotype, because there was comfortable moments for lots of people, but tended to be the sort of white, straight males on the exec team who were, you know, genuinely saying, well, hold on a minute, what is the mirror I need to hold up to myself, and start to have not executive leadership type corporate-y conversations, but how do I get in a room and have real conversations about real emotions, about real things that matter to me but matter to you, and that takes quite a lot of courage, as Anne said before. It does, actually, because, you know, do you bring your whole self to work, or do you bring 80% of yourself to work, or which 25% do you leave at home? And I think everybody's starting to realize that actually you have to bring your whole self to work, right? You can't be two people. I couldn't cope with being a different person at home to what I am in the workplace. So, but not everybody is comfortable with that straight away. So there is something about what you've just said that I think is true probably for every organisation, actually.
I think I should add to that as well. It's just saying I feel like it's you know, for example, there's been so many, like the lunch and learns that I've done in the first organisation, like I've been at other organisations to try to do similar things. I remember I was at one, and you know, they said you choose a topic or issue that you're passionate about, and you know, do lead a training or lead a workshop on it for the whole team, you know. And I done one around white privilege, and oh my god, it was honestly, the reception they got was terrible. As in, like, there was, and again, it's a youth organisation. Predominantly people that we work with are people that are, you know, working class, that are not white, that are from having, you know, from all these different intersectional identity. And for people to sit there in a room that claim to understand the issues that impact young people, to then be like, I don't like white privilege, you know, I've gone through things too, we all get handed the same cards in life. And I'm like, it's actually the most contradictory thing. And also, these are the people that are leading the messaging behind programming, because again, it's like you become very clear around how people even sell the programming to the funders, aka by exploiting stories around trauma and centering things around trauma. It's why even with this loudly, I'm very strict in saying, like, we only provide stories of joy and the needs. So if you want to ask us what, if you've got funders say, what are the issues that impact our young people, we can tell you, but we can tell you what their needs are as opposed to what their trauma are. And I think that there's this kind of sentiment where funders and businesses and senior management and things, etc., believe they are entitled to hear the stories of trauma that people go through that they support by virtue of a very transactional, we give you money, so therefore we should hear all of the bad stories that these young people go through so we can make ourselves look better. It becomes a very like white saviorist thing where it's like, hey, look at us helping all these poor kids. And it completely reduces people down to identities, down to assumptions, down to stereotypes and things, and it's really, really dangerous. And it's like it's no surprise why these funders have got these ideas of also entitled said stories, because the people in senior management who are liaising with these funders, with the people that are funding the said programming, are offering these stories because they just see them as stories. Whereas, for example, I can't tell these stories around like the experiences that my young people go through are ones that I've gone through similar, and ones that I genuinely care about. And it's like having the understanding that, again, when you hire people with lived experience to do work within people from the same communities, equally for businesses and brands and employers, to understand that we are impacted by it a lot more than people, because it's not external to us, it's very internal. It's very much like I see myself in said person. So maybe it means that and it's even when it comes to Black History Month, Pride, it's often left for responsibility of people from the communities within your organization to lead the training, to do all of these things. But are they getting extra money paid towards it to do this extra work? Of course they're not, So therefore, it's really important to either pay the people within the organization, or ask them, people from within the community itself, to signpost you to people from their community to deliver training, to deliver, whatever it may be, because it has to be external, because people internally are always going to be scared that if they say the wrong thing, they're going to lose their job. Whereas if you hire someone externally, they're getting paid anyway. When I get paid to go and deliver training to places, I can deliver it and say what I want, because I'm going to get paid either way. And
you said that. Sorry, Jay, to come in. Sorry, Tanya, to come in on that, and the other point I think Jay just put in the chat as well, about it's incumbent on individuals though to not just expect people to come and help them be curious, but to actually take some responsibility as well. And actually, I think when an organisation is really cross that chasm, so to speak, if actually, as you were just saying then, it's not about bringing somebody in to be representative, it's about people being able to say, look, I'm a bit scared to have this conversation, actually. I might tread on something that I'm not even sure is right, but can I have the conversation with you? Then I think you really know you've got the right sort of conversations happening inside your organisation, or at least that's what I hope anyway.
I agree.
Can I just add in with another question? Sorry.
I was going to say, Sally, why don't you come in? The problem with
I knew I'd have to in this one. The energy in this room, it's fantastic. But this is all great because you're all really, you get it, right? But how would you suggest getting buy-in from an exec board, perhaps if you sense that isn't the case in the organisation?
Sorry, could you say that one more time? How do you get buy-in?
From the exec board. So if people here today are saying, well, this is absolutely, of course this is true, but in my company, I'm not sure, how do we get buy-in?
Yeah, and I've dealt with that a little bit. And I think there's two concrete suggestions. One is say, sit over there and watch while I get to work. And this is because sometimes the people wait for permission, and I had this experience with 4 other colleagues, and we didn't have a lot of support, I would say. We just got to work anyway, and we started to make a difference, and that's a whole nother story, but it was effective. The other one is tell your story, so I was like, all of us have a story to tell, and if you're part of a community of difference, I'm pretty guaranteed that that's not always been rosy, so if you show up and say, let me tell you exactly what it's like to work here. From my perspective, and be open and vulnerable, that's the most effective way that I've found, is to change a mind like that.
Yeah, and just to echo, just to echo that, I mean, that's exactly what we did with the lived experience. So I can only talk as a leader from my own experience. And it was a bit of a deep breath, brave moment, because, you didn't know what you were going to get back. And we did get some uncomfortable truths. And I'm glad we did, actually, because the learning we've had since then and the ongoing uncomfortable conversations we've had and continue to have, I'm really grateful for them now, in a way that once upon a time, would we, as Anne said, would we all try to sort of avoid having them, as opposed to get it out there. So I think, having a program like the lived experience, whatever your your equivalent might be whoever, you know, is interested in doing something like that. You know, just open up that conversation, because it means that the leader, the CEO, the exec have no choice but to listen. And I think alongside that, it goes back to my point about the ROI. You know, you do have to build a business case sometimes around this as well, but you build it from the human, authentic point of view, not from a numbers and target point of view. So I think the combination of those two things.
Yeah,
I just want to add on that just quickly as well. I think that it is also really important, however, to remember that, like, for staff members that maybe don't feel seen or don't feel safe, or etc., to bring their whole selves to work, the idea of telling somebody directly, for example, hey, this is what my first experience is, or this is what how I feel in the company, is where it's oftentimes been gaslit out of, like, how your experience in a certain organisation. Or again, as I said, when I told my colleague, the senior manager, the guy, like, oh, hey, this is what my young people felt, and it felt very discriminatory in this place. And he said, but I didn't mean it that way, you know, and it's therefore I'm not going to talk about it again, you know. And it's like, so that's why I think for these businesses, corporates, whatever, funders, to invest in having an external person to deliver it and to have these conversations. And you can record audio, it can be written down, it can be put into a written report, but I think it has to be also be said that it shouldn't be directly heard. It doesn't have to be directly heard from individual people themselves, because you will still get a watered down version of said thing, because not everyone has the confidence to be able to say, truthfully, this is how I feel in this organisation, without the fear of getting fired. Because there's been times where, you know, I've been at workplace beforehand where we've expressed you know, things around how black staff members were treated, and lo and behold, we both left because nothing was done. And now we said it, things were said were done, and it was actually more, it caused me more issues talking about said issues than if I just stayed quiet. And that is, I think, is a real reality as well that people take into account, is that having an external person deliver it means that you will get the honest truth. And it shouldn't have to be dependent upon having a person in front of you, because again, that in itself, especially for staff members that maybe aren't as senior, is much more daunting, because you feel like you've got much more to lose than somebody who's got 10 years of experience that can get another job elsewhere. Yeah. So I think that is also really important to take into account.
Really helpful advice, Tanya, absolutely right. I mean, part of the difficulty, Sally, isn't it, with a session like this, there's so much, we could go on for another hour, because there's so many stories to tell. There's such a lot of good advice and experience to share. And really, we've just had a hugely rich insight from Tanya and Jay and Kirstie today. But I know, just in coming to a close on this, you want to ask people to make a pledge, don't you? So shall I, can I just hand over to you now to do the closing remarks? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anne. So I think one of my colleagues is going to share a slide in a minute, which will just give you a bit more information about how to make that pledge. As Anne said, this is really, all of these events are really starting the conversations, trying to get us all to engage